Welcome to today's webinar, Can Pharma Find Reputation Redemption? My name is Matthew Quint. I am director of the Center on Global Brand Leadership at Columbia Business School. Really pleased to be here today with all of you and our esteemed panel, as well as our partners in this effort today, our colleagues at the Healthcare and Pharmaceutical Management Program and the Harris Poll, who all work together to set up what is a very timely webinar that we're going to get into today on the reputation of the pharmaceutical industry, an industry that is crucial in supporting our health and wellness, and yet which has faced issues of public criticism over the last couple of decades. But we are in a unique time in pandemic in which trust in this industry will be more important than ever. And we're looking forward to discussing those issues with our great panel from Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer and the Harris Poll and Q. And now I am pleased to pass things off to my friend and colleague, Bunny Ellerin, who is the director of the Healthcare and Pharmaceutical Management Program at Columbia Business School, and who will be taking the lead as the moderator for the rest of the day. Please use the Q&A feature. It's the best way to ask questions. We'll be monitoring the chat as well, but try and use the Q&A feature at the bottom bar to ask questions. We'll kick things off with some general discussion with Bunny and our panelists, and then we'll slide in and we'll help moderate taking some of the questions that come from the audience between myself and Bunny. And we are recording the webinar, and we'll be sharing a link with you afterwards, as well as potentially some slides that are going to be shared showing some data from the Harris Poll. So without further ado, Bunny, take it away.
Thanks a lot, Matt. It's been wonderful working with you on this. And I have to say, I have been looking forward to this discussion for weeks because the topic is so topical. And I've been in the industry a long time. So I am going to briefly introduce our panelists, and we're going to get right into it because we have so many questions and we only have 1 hour. So we want to get to as many questions as possible. So very excited to have us joined today by Sally Sussman, who's the EVP and Chief Corporate Affairs Officer of Pfizer. We also have Michael Sneed, who's the EVP Global Corporate Affairs and Chief Communications Officer of J&J. We have John Breen, who's the Executive Director of Healthcare Strategy at Q. And we have Rob Jekielek, who is Managing Director of Harris Poll. And truth be told, a lot of today came about because of Rob and all of the work Harris Poll has done on this very topic. Rob is going to kick us off with a few slides to kind of set the stage, and then we will get into a conversation. So Rob, take it away.
Thank you very much, Bunny. So just give me a moment. I'm going to project slides. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rob Jekielek. I'm a managing director at the Harris Poll, and really excited to be here as part of the conversation. The question posed, can pharma find reputation redemption, is a very kind of unique and important one, and one that we're really excited to dig into in collaboration with the Columbia Business School. So first and foremost, I'll just start with a couple of headlines, right? So we're going to unpack these in just a little bit more depth. I have a handful of slides to really set up the conversation. As we all know, kind of what we want to get into is, what are we doing and how can we make things better, and, how do we keep up momentum? But where we are today is pharma as an industry is very much front of mind for most Americans, right? And as we know, for a variety of reasons, that brings with it a lot of different things. It brings incredible challenge. It brings incredible responsibility. And what we're seeing right now is incredible opportunity, right? And an opportunity not just from kind of a marketing or communications perspective, but really from providing solutions and helping move society forward. So the two core themes, right, that we're going to talk about, and I'm literally going to go through the headlines, right, is pharma's reputation really have not just persisted, but have gained throughout the pandemic, right? And it's very much driven by action and very unique actions. At the same time, what we're also seeing is that most Americans believe that the COVID-19 vaccine approval process is being driven more by politics than by science. And the percentage of people is not close. It's over 70 to less than 30 that believe that. But let's just start with the big picture. So having worked around the industry for the better part of the last 2 decades, what we can say with an extremely high degree of confidence is we're at a completely new kind of perspective or lens on the industry. So in particular, as we look at the macro picture across industries, when we go back to the last crisis, really the financial crisis, what you in general saw was corporate America or companies being part of the problem, right? Certain industries such as financial services and auto really being at the brunt of it, but you really see kind of a lag in how the public really was perceiving and interpreting virtually all industries. Where we are today around the coronavirus is an extremely different perspective. You're seeing in general from January, especially through July, a lot of rise, right? And the biggest rise that we're going to call your attention to is the one in green, which is the pharmaceutical industry, right? Where not only is the industry up 22 points from where it was in January in terms of positive reputation, but while COVID fatigue, if you will, has started to settle in across a variety of other industries, ranging from grocery to tech to consumer products to auto to manufacturing to financial services, you're actually seeing a lot of resilience in the industry's reputation, which is a very kind of unique benchmark. Also very important to note, when we're talking about perceptual data and we're seeing magnitudes of move of, again, when we compare to January, 20 plus points, it gives you a strong sense of it's not just kind of a single message or a single campaign. There's just a completely new lens for the public to really interpret what these companies stand for, what they're about. So as we start unpacking the situation, what we dove into is specifically during COVID-19, how have your impressions changed, right? And 38% would say they've become more positive, in contrast to 18% who've said more negative. The majority are in that unchanged camp in the middle. But the thing that's really interesting is as we start unpacking these numbers, again, being 2-to-1 positive to negative, which is a very unique trend for pharma from a historical perspective, as well as versus other industries, you see a lot of very compelling reasons, right? So when we look at the foreground and really what's driving that positive sentiment, which really is the lead story today, there are some very, very intuitive aspects to it. There's the overall COVID response, there's vaccine and treatment development, but you also start getting into some pretty interesting areas where it's more around supporting the frontline and essential workers. And one of the most powerful ones that we continue to see emerging even more so is cross-company collaboration, a theme that's really has resonated with the public and kind of pulls forward or addresses, many of the maybe more contentious aspects of or historical kind of perspectives that people have had around the industry. Right, there really has been this. The public has perceived this move towards really finding a solution and working together versus just being, going at it alone, if you will. On the flip side, also noteworthy and important to think about are some of the aspects that are lurking in the background. Right. So again, we know that the story has an overwhelming positive tide to it, but we can't forget about some of the the lightning rods lurking in the background, if you will. You certainly do have perspectives around drug affordability, around a sense of putting, business before people's health. And again, one of the most important ones as we look at pharma, but also as we look at broader healthcare, and as we look at along broader social trends right now, it's around not doing enough for hardest hit populations, right? So themes in the background, but noteworthy. And I think as we look at the conversation today, there's going to be a lot of really important insight into kind of, in particular, those positive themes, but also getting ahead of some of the negatives that might be lurking in the background. So beyond just the overall industry having this halo, if you will, and kind of broad actions taking hold, one of the things we've been able to measurably see is that there's actually a lot of resonance around individual announcements. Right, as companies and as you'll see, as the industry starts getting to specific milestones, there actually has been an incredible amount of resonance with the public, right? The broader trend we've been seeing around companies really as problem solvers, pushing the agenda forward, doing it in a very transparent fashion, have really resonated. And here are three kind of core highlights. One of the ones we looked at and was around Pfizer's announcement of the vaccine deal with the U.S. government. 65% of the public recall having heard about it, and 52% felt more positive about Pfizer. With Moderna, the announcement of the COVID vaccine going into late stage or clinical or phase 3 clinical trials, that's 58% of the public, right? For a brand like Moderna, that's a huge uplift, as well as the majority of the public feeling more positive about the company. The last one, even around Gilead, right? So another kind of core announcement around treatment availability and pricing as it pertains to, again, COVID-19 application. And again, about 50% of the public being aware of it, and just under 50% driving positive favorability. So again, a lot of remarkable pull through for pharmaceutical companies. These numbers are much higher, multiples higher than what you would typically see. But the other piece that's really important is, even as we're looking at individual company announcements and individual company progress, there is substantive positive resonance for the whole industry, right? Really being seen as a agent for solutions, driving the agenda forward and making a positive impact. So probably for many of you on the call, we know this is a highly, deeply expert audience in healthcare and pharmaceuticals, as well as just business more broadly. Politicization of the process has become extraordinarily apparent, right? So what we're seeing today is that this is some research that we recently did with Stat News. The main reason why I'm putting so many logos on here, of all the research we've done around the pharmaceutical industry, which we've been doing a lot of, this has been by far the most resonant theme, and I think for pretty apparent and obvious reasons. So 78% of Americans worry that the COVID-19 vaccine approval process is being driven more by politics than science. And according to a new poll, right? This really is kind of a critical inflection point, right? And one that we also dug into in our research. So I'll leave you with one more slide that hopefully sets up for the conversation to come. So in particular, as we're looking at the overall resonance of the industry and it continuing to pull higher, and we're seeing collaboration across companies as being one of the most unique narratives for really telling a compelling story that the public can believe in and really look to. What we're seeing around the vaccine pledge is really an astonishing number of almost 70% of the public recalling having heard of it. Again, it driving a significant positive impression for the individual companies who signed it, but also having a lot of very positive byproducts that go just beyond just the individual companies. And that's really the key theme, right? So 51% feeling more positive about the vaccine development process, which is really important for public trust. That can't be overstated. 49% feel better about the industry as a whole. 43% even feel more positive about the FDA, that lagging versus the others. But again, based on the whole kind of scenario, a really important contextual element as we think of, the success of the vaccine and the public being comfortable taking it. So with that, Bunny, I will pass back to you to jump into the conversation.
Well, great. This was a terrific setup. It gives us a lot to work with. I think interestingly, your last slide kind of says it all, that 49% feel more positive about pharma versus 43% feeling more positive about the FDA. Never before in my life really has that kind of been the case. I teach a course on pharma commercialization and try and imbue a lot of the positives of the industry. But there have been some, study after study, often the industry has come up short. Where, here, Rob, you said that the positive news, the tide goes right with the entire industry. Historically, it's been the negative news that's brought a lot of the industry down with it. And so just to kind of like reiterate, this is a real inflection point. This is a historic moment for the industry. And so I wanted to start with you, Michael, and then, of course, the rest of the group. But what about today? What about this unique moment in time has given rise to this positive flow for the industry? Why now?
Yeah, well, thanks, Bonnie. Thanks for the question, and thanks for having me on the panel. I think there's a couple of things that everyone should consider. Clearly, the spread of COVID-19, it's really strained the healthcare system, and it's just jolted society, I think, like no pandemic has ever done, certainly in our lifetime. And I think it's made people scared about their health. They've been anxious about the future, and frankly, they're desperate for breakthroughs. And that's where companies like Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer and others come in. On a personal level, I think people want to know what they can do for themselves and their family to keep them as safe as possible from infectious diseases. And then on a societal level, I think we're really seeing some of the inadequacies of our healthcare system. Really just the ability to handle sudden surges. Everyone's seen the lack of, in my opinion, the lack of preparedness when it comes to PPE. And of course, we've seen racial injustice in terms of access to healthcare for people of color. And so I think companies like Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, and others, I think you see us step up in a way that really is what the industry has been built to do. And clearly at Johnson & Johnson, we focus on trying to blend our heart and science and ingenuity to really change the trajectory of health for all of humanity. And that's been very clear when it comes to vaccine development. As everybody knows, and as you've pointed out, Rob, in some of the survey work, but clearly you have a company like J&J who, when the coronavirus emerged, we knew how essential it would be to get a vaccine onto the marketplace, to be able to do that quickly. And so we took that kind of action in terms of the development of a vaccine. And it's really been an all-out effort across industry. And as I said earlier, it's because I think industry as a whole recognizes that this is their moment to show the value that we have for all of humanity. And I think you're seeing that when it comes to the reputational scores that the studies are indicating.
Sally, would love you to weigh in as well.
Thank you. And let me also thank you, Bunny and Rob, for that great setup and all the good data. It's an honor to be with these folks on the panel. I feel like I might just repeat absolutely everything that Michael just said. And it's rare that we're all in such synchronicity, but it's just been that kind of a catalytic moment. If I could just back up for 30 seconds and offer a bit of a personal anecdote, that I had worked at 2 other companies before coming to Pfizer in communications roles that were very beloved companies and had an easy and positive relationship with the public. And I came to Pfizer 12 years ago, I guess 13 years now, to address this very specific challenge, to work on the thing that drove us to this panel today, which is how is it that an industry that makes life-saving medicine could have as much reputational struggle as we've had over these years. I thought this would be easy to fix. I spent over a decade trying to fix it and not succeeding. And now everything has changed because of this moment that we are in. And, just as Michael said, we all saw and felt in January and February the urgency. Cases are spiraling across the globe. The WHO makes a global health emergency. And in March, Albert Bourla, Pfizer CEO, made a bold ambition that we would have data ready to share with the FDA, hopefully by October, to produce hundreds of millions of doses in 2020 and 1.3 billion doses beyond. Whether or not we're going to achieve that remains to be seen. But I think all the companies that you're studying and that we're talking about, J&J, AstraZeneca, Moderna, we're all doing our very best and doing it in the way we think is right. And our hope is that there will be several solutions, because there's 7.6 billion people out there that need help, and no one is safe until everyone is safe. I just wanted to add one point, and then I won't go on. Things have happened differently. There was early in March a real effort and campaign around collaboration and helping one another and sharing ideas. And then the pledge that was referenced came just a couple of weeks ago, which, really, I have to say that Albert Bourla, Pfizer CEO, and Alex Gorsky, J&J CEO, were both really crucial in, I think, bringing that forward very quickly with their leadership. And then ultimately 9 companies signed, which was terrific. To address the concern that this process has become too political and put our full faith back in science and in the FDA. What I believe is the next hurdle or the horizon, the issue of coming forward, will be the distribution. And by that, I don't mean delivery. These companies know how to control supply chain. They know how to do cold chain. But I mean the moral, ethical, and political issues that surround who will get these vaccines first, and how will we distribute these vaccines in a way that is moral and ethical and strategic, so that we can combat our common enemy, the virus. Thank you.
Well said. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you both for that. I think you both touched on a lot. So I do want to talk a little bit about politics and how that's been injected into this. Certainly the vaccine conversation, and the data shows that faith in our regulatory bodies is lower than it's been. So this, the Stand with Science pledge, maybe one of you can talk about it and sort of how it actually came together, because to be honest, it was truly remarkable to see that happen.
Yeah, I can speak, Sally, and you can certainly add your perspective. But I will say that as companies like J&J and Pfizer, we are very committed to be leaders in public education and engagement. And like Sally, I think we're sometimes frustrated that industry doesn't get the kind of credit that we think it deserves. And so, like so many people around the country, around the world, I think there was real concern that there was a lot of mixed messages about what was going on with regard to vaccine development. And so as leaders in the industry, we really felt it was important to come together and develop this pledge. And it all happened quite quickly because people were so passionate about making sure that everybody knew exactly where we stood with regard to the importance of science and, frankly, how we not only develop vaccines, but how we develop drugs in general, that it's all driven by science and that there is no politics when it comes to it. And certainly it's given us the opportunity to continue to better educate all sorts of stakeholders around just what the industry does and the impact that it can have on people's lives. But clearly bringing this together in a way where we can really put a line in the sand and say, this is our commitment. This is what we are going to be committed to in terms of how we develop it, how we're going to lead with science, that we're not going to be taking shortcuts, and to make it as clear as possible that politics has no role in the clinical work all of these companies are doing, in the look at all of the data, and to make sure that people can continue to be confident in when we do get a vaccine, and as Sally said, multiple vaccines, hopefully, that people can feel very confident in being able to get one.
May I just add a little bit to what Michael said, again, in complete agreement with everything he said. But I also believe that the energy and speed with which the pledge came together reflected a transformation that many of these companies had been doing even pre-COVID. So for example, again, you see the leadership of J&J CEO Alex Gorski at the Business Roundtable with stakeholder engagement. You see Pfizer transforming away from being a diversified company, selling our consumer business, separating from our generic business, wanting to be a fully biotech-focused company, completely science-led. I think what's happened is that COVID has become an accelerator of good things that were already happening in and around the industry.
Yeah, Sally, I think that's absolutely right. I think that in many ways, one of the things the industry has to continue to do is showcase science and bring it to a place where people can understand the impact of it. There's so many wonderful things happening within the industry when it comes to biotechnology, when it comes to what's going on with cell therapy and gene therapy that have a direct and will have a direct impact on people's lives and the health of themselves and their family. And so folks like myself and Sally, we get very excited about being able to just continue to elevate that and tell more people about it. I know for us at J&J, the vaccine and the pandemic has really given us that opportunity to talk about, as an example, kind of what takes place behind the scenes when it comes to the development of a vaccine. And so we launched this digital mini-series called The Road to a Vaccine with journalist Lisa Ling. And it really is, we think, a leap forward in terms of getting people an understanding of what it takes, providing more public education so that people can understand what goes into R&D, what goes into clinical trials, all the things that we consider that most people don't really spend the time nor want to, quite honestly. But when you have a pandemic like this, all of a sudden you have the kind of attention that we've seen.
I think it's interesting if I could jump in
sure.
and sorry, figure I'll throw my hat in the ring here at some point during the conversation. But it's interesting, we've engaged in a number of conversations with patient opinion leaders along the way and along the lines of this topic. And collaboration and transparency are the two biggest things that kind of came to the forefront of how pharma can continue to elevate its reputation and do right by patients. And I think what's quite interesting is giving them a look kind of under the hood, so to speak, with series like Michael, you just described, or going deeper in how things are developed or why things happen is one of the things I think we can really look forward to as, kind of continue to be viewed in this light in a positive manner.
I do want to go back to the point about the vaccine development, because interestingly, when you show people how intense the process is, normally we know that the shortest timeline for a vaccine in the past, the shortest was 4 years, right? And so here we are, we may have a vaccine in under a year. So people are nervous. I get these kinds of questions all the time. Rob, what does the data show?
Thanks, Bunny. Yeah, I think this is, when we think of some of these bigger aspects like collaboration, one of the most important aspects of it, or the data would point to, right, is just becoming a source of information that's really trusted, right? So when we're working together, right, and to the point you're exactly making, like the data is very clearly showing that even as some things are going up, like pharma reputation, people's confidence in the vaccine in many cases is beginning to waver, right? And even as you start looking at kind of time horizons, especially as you've had politicization of the FDA, the closer timeframes actually make a lot of people very reticent. Mm-hmm. Most of the data right now, like if we were benchmarking back to where we were 6 months ago, right, in order to get to that same level of confidence, you now have people projecting out to early next year, right? You have a lot more people kind of across the board, across generation, across political, across ethnicity, showing much higher levels of discomfort in a vaccine, and kind of like, especially if you say pre-election or something like that, right? This is less, I think of it less of as kind of an anecdote about the research. It's more just how important the process is and being able to instill confidence in it, right? So again, and I didn't mention this, but pharma companies are amongst the most trusted sources of information about the vaccine. That is why something like the pledge works, right? It's not as high as some of the frontline workers or frontline health delivery people like physicians or nurses, right? That really the public kind of leans to, but you have over 70% of the public seeing pharma companies as a trusted source on the vaccine. That's a very, very high number, right? And
So
the confidence in the vaccine is a big issue. It's a big issue.
Sorry, I'm jumping in here, but
yeah, please. Sorry, Sally.
I understand, of course, why people have anxiety. It's understandable. And go back to the earlier things that Michael said about the kind of compounded tragedies we're enduring here. You know, I see some people appear to be in offices. I'm working from my home. I've been home since March 10. You know, my mother-in-law had COVID at 91. My 26-year-old daughter had to come back from graduate school because her school closed. I'm in New York City where the economic conditions are obvious and difficult. Wildfires are burning in the West. Hurricanes are coming across. Climate change is causing enormous strife. People are very, very anxious. And the fact that the vaccine is coming as quickly as it is requires a tremendous amount of additional explanation.
Yeah.
I'm delighted that the data shows that the companies are credible. We have always felt that there was a risk of our own commercial interest appearing to be in this, although nobody's really making money on these vaccines. But, you know, the more important thing, and an important thing to remember as many of us are communicators here, is that Pfizer's a 171-year-old company, and we have an obligation to our legacy. We would never cut a corner. And we need to speak these truths about our values very clearly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's a great point, Sally. And as again, anyone who in the industry knows that when it comes to companies like Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, I mean, we understand the long-term investments that are needed. We play for the long term. And so we're not, you know, it is in no one's best interest to cut corners or to be pressured into doing something that we don't absolutely feel is in the very best interest of the public. And that's why I think you're seeing a lot of movement with regard to increased collaboration, as we spoke about, but frankly, increased transparency. And it's something that I know Pfizer's done. You know, J&J has been doing this for several years with our Yale Open Data Access initiative, where we give all of our clinical data to the folks up in Yale, and they can tear it apart and understand what's in there. Because we believe fundamentally that the more the public understands what happens, they actually will feel better. And I know at J&J we've taken great strides to explain that we're able to move so quickly because we've used our vaccine platform on things like Ebola already, on things like Zika, on the N1H1 flu from several years ago. So again, we invested, as Pfizer has, you know, for decades in this space, and now it's all coming to the fore. And frankly, our citizens and citizens around the world will be able to take advantage of it. At the same time, we have to take the opportunity to explain why this is not something that was surprising to us, that we've actually been planning for this moment for years and years.
So how prevalent is this throughout the industry? I mean, we have two of the greatest pharma companies, and you do more than pharma here, but it's a big industry. And what are your peers saying? Are they as willing to publish data? I mean, that was a really big deal when I thought, 2 weeks ago when one after another protocols were published in terms of transparency. Do you see this continuing and others jumping in beyond vaccines?
I do. You made a great observation, Bunny, about the publishing of the protocols that had never been done before, at least by Pfizer. And I think that don't wait for the day when we're going to go back to how we were. Everything is, I think, moving forward, and greater transparency will be expected. faster timelines. There's no reason we can't have these kind of accelerated timelines in other circumstances. And I speak with a number of my peers in the other companies, at least the large companies, and I think they are equally interested in being more forthcoming, more candid, and more real with people, and using this moment not as an exception, but as the new rule.
Yeah, and Sally and Benny, I think companies, well, first of all, a couple of things. One, and Sally knows this, we had companies late in the process when we were developing the pledge who wanted to get in on it because they recognized how powerful that was. And so that was a lot of last minute maneuvering, because I do think companies understood that this was a very special moment. And then moving forward, I think companies have seen that in today's environment, with healthcare being so important, not only on a personal level, but it's upwards of 20% of our GDP here in the U.S. We have an opportunity to understand at an even better, more important level that we have to talk to all stakeholders. And there's going to be people who are going to be suspicious and critical. But in order to continue to gain trust and make sure that we continue to improve our reputation, this notion of going back to where we were, to Sally's point, I think those days are over. People have seen the value of having greater collaboration, of having real partners across the spectrum, whether it's the government officials and governments, health organizations like the FDA and the CDC. These are natural partners for us, and going back to a time where those didn't exist, I don't think that's a recipe for success moving forward.
I think the sustainability of it is, I think, what's really, really exciting, and seeing it. I mean, I think of this in terms of cohesion, in times of urgency, and all the things that we're learning right now. And then how do we continue to apply that to other areas of need? How do we create the right incentives for companies to partner together? I'd love to see the day where pharma is truly seen as the guardians of public health, and we're honing in on different types of partnerships and collaborations that allow us to advance areas that will impact public health. I was talking to a colleague before. It's like, it's just inspiring. Imagine what we can achieve together if we find the right ways of doing it. So it's just a really exciting time, and I really hope it's sustainable.
Kind of building on the public health and getting back to what you said earlier, Michael, on health disparities. The health disparities in this country have been rampant for many years, but COVID-19 really opened the lid in a big, big way, and people can't ignore it. What role do you all see pharma playing going forward in helping to move that needle so that health disparities are not where they are today?
Yeah, look, they are, the racial inequalities are real. They're persistent, as you've said. I do think that we as leaders in healthcare have an opportunity to really address it in a big way. One of the things that I and others should really take a hard look at is that the pandemic has really exposed the fragility of our healthcare system, and that it does not work for all people in the same way. And we certainly know that your health and the prospect for longevity really shouldn't be a reflection of your race. And that there is no, from my perspective, there is a direct link between racial justice and healthcare. And there is no path to racial justice in America without justice in healthcare. And so I do think that there's an opportunity in a number of areas, whether it is more diversity in clinical trials, which I think is incredibly important to get more communities of color involved in clinical trials, to the support that I know Pfizer and companies like J&J do in encouraging more and more people of color to go into the medical professions, so that people who are in communities of color. They see people who look like them, who are doctors and nurses and work in the sciences. These are things that really will start to bend the curve and really change the trajectory over time. I mean, there's a number of other pieces of legislation and initiatives, but make no mistake about it. We cannot have a robust and a strong healthcare system without starting to address the real fragilities that this pandemic has exposed.
Yeah, again, we're in agreement, but I think on this point, it's important that as many people speak as possible and not to sort of be silent on this. You know, Pfizer, like a lot of other great companies, is increasingly an outcomes-oriented company, and it's no longer, I think, good enough to try, but we must succeed at ensuring that we have more representation of diverse populations, people of color, African Americans specifically, in our employment base, in our senior leadership in particular. Pfizer last year announced a new purpose blueprint, and we have 4 company values. And you know, in a lot of companies, you have 13 values, and there are a lot of corporate speak of things like be good citizens and the blah, 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 where we live and work. Our 4 values are courage, excellence, equity, and joy. And equity was very specifically put in with the knowledge that the world we want to see inside and outside Pfizer has to look different than the world we have today, and that reducing healthcare disparities specifically would be part of our core mission. You know, it has to be as rigorous as everything else we do.
Yeah, absolutely, great point, Sally. And I would say we would do the same thing. I mean, in many ways, we speak about what we need to do from a diversity and equity and inclusion perspective, the same way we look at our sales and income and our pipeline. You know, those things have got to get better and better every year, and that's no different than when we're talking about these areas. The one thing I would say, and I certainly agree with you, the mindset that I really believe we need to be talking about as we work our way through COVID-19 and get a vaccine, I've really tried to be careful not to say we're going to have a new normal, because I think we need to have a better normal. To go back to where we were is not going to be good enough when you're talking about people of color, African Americans, Hispanics, because that normal was not good for them to begin with. Mm-hmm. And so this notion and this aspiration of having a better normal is what I think we should all be speaking about and being very vocal about.
I think that starts with listening. To be honest, you know, when we speak to patients, to consumers, you know, how do we begin bringing the voice of the patient into the design and execution of, let's say, clinical trials, developing strategies to meet the needs of diverse populations? How do we bring local communities into these areas? How do we, you know, I would challenge to pharma, you know, how do we start creating the right partnerships to bring that voice in? I think that's another area that we can start to build upon to bring, you know, diversity to clinical trials as one example.
Yeah. The only additional point I would add, so especially when we look at health disparities during COVID, you know, we do a lot of research. It's less about the perceptual research. It's more about how that translates into actual action, right? I mean, so just seeing pharma companies stepping up as being really credible voices is just so important, because again, work that we do around with the AHA around heart and stroke, right? I mean, your hospital admissions into ERs have plummeted, especially with certain ethnic, with Black and Hispanic Americans, right? That's like a real problem, right? And a lot of it is driven by exactly all the fear trends that Sally has set up, right? I mean, we're seeing very similar. We're about to release some work with ASCO, and it gets towards, you know, clinical oncology, right? These kind of the impacts of health disparities today is just so pointed, and really, I mean, these are, you know, it's really people's lives that are at stake right now, and people not making good decisions based, you know, to a very large degree based off of fear, some of it, again, for good reason, some of it probably exacerbated beyond the actual health risk that they're facing.
So we are getting a ton of questions, as you would expect from this audience. So we're going to start answering some of them. Matt Quint, my partner in crime, is going to take the first one.
Great. Thanks, Bunny. Yeah, there are, I think, tons of good ones here. And actually, one came up, you guys nicely addressed some of the disparity issues, right? Reflecting back to the Tuskegee experiments in syphilis. I actually took a theater class in college with a professor who wrote a wonderful award-winning play about the ethics around that. So for those interested in looking back at history, look that up. But I think one of the things coming out about the vaccine and the politicization and trust and such, I think the sort of follow-up that a few people have asked is, how are you thinking about your sort of communication strategies to get at the folks who are wary and normally maybe might take a vaccine, but also, of course, the compounding factor of kind of the anti-vax movement and this sense of things. And I think obviously, John and Rob, that's sort of equal to your roles as it is to Sally and Michael. So why don't you think, what are those strategies you're beginning to consider?
Well, we are probably, like most people, have chosen a strategy called all of the above. And we are doing everything. We have a set of advertising that we're doing specifically in vehicles that reach communities of color, where we talk about, our commitments to safety. We have our chief patient officer, Dr. Dara Richardson-Herron, out on the circuit. We're connecting with, I think, important organizations like the Black Nurses and others. We are testifying on this before Congress. I just think this is one of those moments where, you have to really use every tool in your toolkit, but also, and importantly, push back on the politics. As we are being asked these questions, there are a lot of people that would like us to move more slowly and not have something in October. There are other people who want us to move more quickly and have something before a particular date in November. And we are moving precisely at the speed of science. And we're pushing back hard on politics. And I think every time a political person of either party starts to talk about the vaccine timing, you can ask Rob to tell you that the confidence numbers will plummet. So we need to raise our own voices and try our best to silence the people who are hurting the cause of science and truth.
By the way, I love speed of science. I'm going to use that.
I copyright.
I'll pay you royalties. Others on the panel?
Yeah, I just say ditto to what Sally said, using all available means. I do think one of the things, and probably Rob has seen this in his data, but one of the most trusted sources for vaccine information are doctors and personal physicians. So we are spending and preparing a lot of information to make sure that doctors themselves feel comfortable and confident in the vaccine progress, because that's where patients are going to go first, to their family physician, to their doctor, to really hear the real scoop. So in addition to all the other things, that's another area where we're very much focused on.
I'll add on to that, because that's in all the research we're doing right now and many of the initiatives that we're working on, it's how do you get to the people that the public trusts, right? So it is absolutely doctors who are on the front line. It is nurses and everything, again, all the real data on what's going to move the needle pushes towards proximity and relatability, right? I mean, so much of this turns into something that feels like a grassroots movement, right? Doctors, nurses, but still, I mean, one of the, and also hospital networks, right? Actually, some of the more, the higher profile hospital networks are seen as incredibly trusted sources. So just important kind of, extended partners to think about in pharma. But friends and family are still one of the most, top 5 sources for, trusted sources on the vaccine, right? that is what that conversation looks like is completely different, obviously, than the ones we're having with doctors or nurses, right? It can build on it, but it has to feel very, very different for it to really be meaningful, credible, and relatable. So it's a really, really hard problem to solve. But, it's the all-in strategy Sally outlined so neatly.
I mean, look, trust is built on personal connections, common culture, and shared experiences. I mean, the all-in strategy is right. And, it's tackling all those different, or touching all those different areas. And even people that are respected in the community leaders, I think is another audience just to consider in all this. But Sally's point is right. I mean, it's the all-in strategy is the way to go. And that's how ultimately we'll build trust in this scenario.
Well, we talked, about brand redemption, and obviously this has been a pivotal time. What can the industry do to make sure that, as you've all been talking about, you don't go back to a different time and that you just keep going forward? What are some specific strategies that you're thinking about, contemplating, or putting in motion, and others should too?
Yeah, one of the things that I think we're giving serious thought to, and again, it really comes off of the success we've had with our web series around Road to a Vaccine. It's just figuring out how to elevate science in a way that's very much more relatable to the average person. We have, it's, again, there's a lot of ironies here, but in many ways, we have the highest standard of living of any country in the world because of the healthcare industry, and all the discoveries, et cetera, over the years and decades, and yet people almost take it for granted. And so we've realized that we can't take it for granted. That people have to understand just the value of science and what that entails, but bringing it to a point where it's understandable so that people feel as if they've got a real stake in it. So I know that's one of the things that we'll be continuing to do and think how we can expand that moving forward.
Yeah, a great point. I mean, science has become very real for people. People are talking about it around their dinner tables and in casual conversation. And, scientists as heroes, because they are. And I think that is our opportunity, that this has now become, through all the webcasts and blogs and movies and films that everybody across the industry is working on, to make it what it is, action-packed, dramatic, fun, exciting. Science is going to be the hero here.
What about patients? We've kind of dabbled on it. Patients have had a much stronger voice over the past two decades. They're playing a much different role than they ever did. Doctors are playing a much different role. I know that we talked about how important they are in the conversation to get a vaccine. But John, you made the point that it's really also friends and family and these patient opinion leaders. How do we engage them in this conversation?
I think it's interesting, when we've talked to patient opinion leaders, there's a desire to kind of humanize pharma, but the connections are there. It's probably not surprising, and Rob, you probably have the quant data on this, but those that have communicated with a pharmaceutical company or have some form of relationship tend to have a better impression of the industry as a whole. There's this opportunity, they're yearning to almost put a face on the industry and almost have it more of an invested relationship in a lot of ways to create that sustainable relationship between the company and different patient groups. And what was interesting, we had some of these conversations, the idea of reciprocity comes up because, there are conversations happening, but even the simplest thing by saying, if I'm somebody with a chronic disease and I'm offering consultation to a pharmaceutical company, come back to me and let me know, how my opinion impacted clinical trial design or help somebody else show that impact. So I think bringing, and look, it's been talked about a lot, but bringing the patient voice into this and creating a more sustainable relationship, an ongoing relationship with patients is definitely desirable in the conversations we've had.
May I add another voice that's in the mix here? And
Yeah.
that is trial participants. We have more than 35,000 people in our late stage trial right now. And because it's a pandemic and because the whole world, everyone is a social media commentator and influencer, we're experiencing something we've never experienced before, which is people are broadcasting their experiences of being in this trial.
Right.
I don't know if people saw the very compelling piece that was in the New York Times about 2 weeks ago. A woman named Molly Young Fast outed herself as patient 1133 and talked about how she considered it her civic duty to get into a clinical trial right now. And that's kind of an interesting new dimension to me, because I've never before had this chorus of trial participants speaking out. And to John's point, it's not a one-way street, it's a relationship. The trial participants are asking if they ended up having placebo, because they were, brave enough and civic-minded enough to raise their hands and be involved, can they get to have the vaccine as soon as it's approved? We're working through that, and I hope the answer will be yes. But I love the fact that it's a dialogue with these people and not just a one-way street.
Yeah, it's interesting. They're really broadcasting their involvement, which you never see in trials before. And John, to your point, one of the things that we've been doing at J&J for the last 4 or 5 years is we started an initiative called Healthy Voices, where we brought together different patient advocacy groups just so they could learn from each other on how to advocate for themselves and their particular disease. And I will say it's really broken down the suspicion that they had about J&J or other companies, because they immediately thought, well, what's in it for you? Why are you doing this? And then we would bring in patient advocate groups on products and categories that we don't even have a business in. But it's all part of our credo in terms of putting patients first. But it's been an amazing, and I've had the pleasure and the privilege of speaking to these groups many times. It's amazing that the passion they feel and then the voice they can have without us having to have the voice, they can actually be the voice and talk about their experiences. So that's just another way where patient groups have a direct experience with a company. It's a positive one. They see that they're actually in service of them as patients, and it becomes a win-win for everybody.
Well, we're coming just about to 4 o'clock. So I just wanted to get from each of you, first of all, thank you so much, but I wanted to get from each of you, what makes you hopeful about the future? We've been living in a very hard time. What gets you excited about where we're going?
Well, I'll build again on one of the very wise things that Michael said about the notion of a better normal. I've been describing it to myself as, can this moment be a movement for something better? And I do believe it will be.
Thank you.
Yeah, look, maybe I'll end where I started, where it clearly has been a deeply challenging year for everybody. We've had these twin pandemics, the virus and racial inequality. But like Sally, I actually think it's a moment where people are reassessing what we can be and the opportunity and the aspirations that we should all have as a country, and frankly as a world, and the knowledge that we are all closely tied, much more so than we may have thought or may have wanted to think, and that the success and the health of us as individuals is very much tied to each other. And I'm very hopeful that people will understand that and take it as a moment to really change the trajectory and move to a much better place.
What's hopeful for me, I work at Q, I work with a lot of very creative people, and historically, they weren't necessarily interested in working on healthcare. And I think we're seeing healthcare is becoming the thing. It's cool. People are interested. We're designing creative interventions to big challenges and bringing designers, artists, people who historically haven't been in this. And it's going to inspire new thinking. And I think we need that. And I think that's really, really inspiring that people are taking an interest, and there's going to be a level of, I think, creativity to problem solving coming in from new voices that we haven't seen before.
Rob?
I mean, the thing that makes me hopeful, optimistic, but I think actually quite confident is that it's, you know, you're seeing this positive data on reputation, which is great, but it's really being driven by substantive and different action, right? If you've just the operational jujitsu that companies like Pfizer and JJ have had to do in order to move forward in terms of vaccine development, as well as the dozen other initiatives they're running, it's a big behavioral change. It's right. It's not just kind of like, oh, we're going to do the same thing and do it a little bit faster or something like that, right? So, I mean, and it's actually pulling through, right? It really does have bite with constituencies that have been much more skeptical in the past, right? So the right actions are being taken, and people are really interpreting them in very constructive ways and giving the industry kudos.
Well, thank you. On that note, I want to thank John, Michael, Sally, Rob, for your insights and thoughts today. Makes me very, very hopeful as well. I want to thank Matthew Quint, my partner at Columbia. And I also want to thank Bianca Bellino and Evangeline Liu, who worked with us to produce this. And thank all of you for tuning in. Thanks for your questions, and we will follow up with a survey and hopefully some slides. Have a great afternoon, and looking forward to moving at the speed of science.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.